If you want to maximize muscle growth and strength gains in the gym and squeeze out every possible ounce of muscle from every session, you need to know how to properly use progressive overload. This isn't just some training tip, it's the foundational principle that separates those who make real progress for years to come from those who stay beginners all their lives. So, if you're putting in the work but you aren't seeing the results you expect, there's a good chance you're not truly harnessing or perhaps understand progressive overload. So in this video, I'll break down exactly what progressive overload is, why it's so crucial for building muscle and strength, and how you can apply it in multiple scenarios to break through plateaus and make every session count. By the end, you'll have a clear plan to master this key principle, sidestep common mistakes, and start seeing the gains you're after. So let's start with the basics. Progressive overload is the backbone of any effective training program designed for muscle growth. Simply put, it's the strategy we use to make sure that we continue to place the right amount of stimulus, i.e. mechanical tension, on the muscle to keep growing. Your body adapts to the demands you place on it, but if those demands stay the same, your results will plateau. Progressive overload shows us that our training is working in creating bigger and stronger muscles, and we want to make sure that we continue achieving a high level of intensity so the gains don't stop. Think of it like this, your body's like a machine, and it only adapts to the work it's given. If you're lifting the same weight for the same reps month after month, your muscles have no reason to grow or get stronger. Pushing for progressive overload is what keeps that momentum going. When it comes to gym progression, there are different progression methods that can help you consistently increase the challenge on your muscles. For the purpose of muscle growth specifically, linear progression, double progression, and volume load progression are the most common approaches to keep your gains coming. Let's go over these core methods along with a few other key things to keep in mind to show you how they can help you make consistent progress in your training. Let's start with linear progression. Linear progression is commonly used by beginners and involves simply adding a small, consistent amount of weight every single session, every week. For example, if you're adding 5 pounds to your squat weekly, that's a form of linear progression. You're moving just one variable at a time, in this case, the load. This approach works best in the early stages when the body adapts very quickly and it's very sensitive to training stimulus. However, as you advance, adding weight linearly becomes less sustainable, of course, and other methods like double or volume progression become more practical in some cases. So let's break down double progression. Double progression is probably the most reliable method for achieving steady growth after the beginner stage. Here, you're focusing on 2 or more variables, typically reps and weight. For instance, first, you aim to hit the upper end of a target rep range with a specific weight. Once you reach the top end of that rep range with solid form, for example, 10 reps if your rep range is 6 to 10, and then you increase the weight and start back at the lower end of that rep range. So, if you're bench pressing 185 pounds for 6 to 10 reps, once you're able to hit 10 reps cleanly on one of those sets, you'd move up to 190 or 195 pounds for that specific set next time and work your way back up from 6 reps, i.e. the lower end of the rep range. Double progression keeps you from jumping too quickly, and it allows you to treat each individual set as its own target to beat and progress on. Keep in mind, I recommend tracking reps in reserve as well to make sure you keep your proximity to failure on each set somewhat consistent as you progress. And this also adds a third variable to use in your double progression. For instance, you'll only bump your weight up once you can achieve the 10 reps, but at a 2 RIR or reps in reserve. This adds a layer of detail that can help you continue to progress the more advanced you become. And that is what I recommend if you're an intermediate or beyond. Now, what about volume load progression? This method focuses on increasing your total workload over time instead of just adding weight to reps. For instance, if you're doing 3 sets of squats, moving to 4 sets is a straightforward way to increase total volume load. Volume load progression is only really something to add in if you're seeking to bump volumes up slightly in a more experimental way, and it's not something that you want to do every single week. Sometimes lowering volumes may be the answer as well, but it's worth experimenting to find that sweet spot for you, especially as you go between cut and bulk cycles. Wave loading and step loading are 2 other forms of progression one can build their program off of, but it doesn't really apply all that much to muscle growth training, so we're not going to cover those here. As a beginner, keep things simple. Use the linear progression model until gains slow down, and adding weight to the bar every week or every other week stops working so easily. Then switch to a double progression, which you'll probably use for the rest of your training career as long as the goal remains maximum muscle growth. Volume load progression or regression may happen from one training block to the next along your journey as well. By the way, progressive overload isn't limited to just what's in the logbook. Sometimes progress comes in more subtle but equally powerful ways that might not directly show up as higher numbers on a lift. After all, if it was as simple as just add more weight and reps infinitely, then everybody would bench press 4,000 pounds like I do, right? Here are a few examples of other ways that progress happens. Number 1 is improved technique and control. So as you train your form and control on each lift, should improve over time. You might start using a more controlled eccentric, adding a pause in key positions, or adjusting your setup for better leverages that work best for your anatomy. This doesn't necessarily mean that you're lifting more weight, but you're making each rep more effective by increasing muscle activation and tension on the targeted muscle to begin with. Next is enhanced stability and execution. As your body adapts to certain exercises, especially freeweight ones, that once felt unstable or awkward, they may now become more fluid and efficient. For example, the squat that used to feel super wobbly might start feeling rock solid. This increased stability that happens internally is a clear sign that you're getting stronger and more proficient in the movement pattern, even if the weight on the bar isn't changing every single week during this process. These two key forms of progression happen from just being more experienced and improving over time in the gym, and it allows you to squeeze way more stimulus out of the same or even sometimes less weight than you did prior. I mean, you look at an advanced trainee with a sick physique executing a bench press, it's usually going to look so much better and so much smoother and therefore more effective than when the beginner does it. Next is reduced rest time. So another way to see progress is actually by gradually lowering rest times between sets over time, to a reasonable degree of course, while maintaining the same weight and reps, or even still continuously progressing. Being able to keep performance just as high on a set-to-set basis with slightly less rest times as your body adapts to it improves work capacity. Speaking of which, let's talk about increased work capacity. When you're able to handle more total volume or intensity in a session without feeling overly fatigued, you're increasing your work capacity. Now, this doesn't always mean lifting heavier, but it does mean your body's adapting to handle greater demands. Over time, this improvement in work capacity will help you handle higher volumes should you need to, or get more done in less time, which can allow you to more easily complete the required volume you need down the line if you decide to run a high volume specialization phase for arms or delts or something like this, for example. Progressive overload is more than just the numbers on paper. It's about consistently challenging your body in different ways and adapting to those challenges that are showing you're getting stronger and building muscle. Whether it's to improve technique, squeezing more stimulus out of less weight, or reduced rest time, these progressions are all signs that you're probably getting better. Remember, it's not always about just beating the logbook every session. Now, you hopefully understand progressive overload a lot more clearly and how it applies in more ways than one. So now let's take these 3 quick steps to ensure that you implement it into your training properly ASAP. Number 1, set a baseline. So first, you need to know where you are right now on your main lifts. Track the weight, reps, and sets you're currently doing for each key exercise. This gives you a clear starting point so you know exactly what you're trying to beat next time. Next is track your progress. So the only way to ensure that you're overloading progressively is to track everything. Use a workout tracking app. Take notes of each session, track your weight, reps, RIR, and making notes and taking occasional form videos to stay on top of your execution. Keeping records of your training history is your personal roadmap to long-term progress. Next is set realistic expectations. Progress in the gym doesn't have to be drastic. Reality hits all of us hard when those noob games slow down, and we realize we now have to work twice as hard and be twice as smart with our programming for basically half the gains every year. That's just how the game goes. If you didn't gain a rep or 2 this week from last week, as long as you pushed hard enough on that set, muscle growth could still be happening. Even with a solid understanding of progressive overload, there are still common mistakes that can hold you back. Here are some of the things to avoid. Number 1, I've already sort of mentioned, but it's trying to beat the logbook by any means necessary. It's tempting to try and jump up in weight every week, but rushing weight increases without mastering form leads to plateaus and, worse yet, injuries. As you scale the weight up, you scale up the shitty form habit along with it if you're not careful. Trying to beat the logbook to satisfy your ego by any means necessary could likely have you rushing towards a world of pain. Take it from a battered motherfucker who sustained enough injuries from not being warned about this himself. Next is neglecting other methods. Remember, many lifters think progressive overload just means adding weight still, but as we've covered, it can be done through better execution as well. You should always be trying to get more stimulus from the movement than you currently do. If that means more full range of motion, pausing on your presses, focusing on your squeeze, getting the better contraction, controlling your rib cage or pelvis properly during these movements, etc. Next is overemphasizing form. So yes, believe it or not, on the opposite end of the spectrum, on the flip side to the previous points, people may take this message and overemphasize their technique, lowering the weight by 8 seconds on the eccentrics, thinking, oh, okay, so I could just make 135 pounds feel like the 300 pounds. But that doesn't work, unfortunately. You need to place a large demand on the muscles under reasonable conditions, and purposely slowing down the eccentric, or especially the concentric portion of the lift at the expense of using proper loads to generate enough tension on the muscle can actually just cause you to lose your gains, or not make any further gains. Look, we don't want you to constantly fear injury either. That's not the point here, and that will hold you back. Be reasonable with your form. A 2 to 3 second eccentric and an explosive concentric is good enough. If you avoid these mistakes and stay disciplined, you're going to find progressive overload working in your favor a lot more consistently. Now, one question I get asked sometimes is, which training split is best to ensure the fastest progression? And the answer is, it depends. Surprise, surprise, right? That said, it's going to come down to a split that allows you to hit the right amounts of volumes and frequencies that will work best for you. And more importantly, the split that you actually enjoy and can stick to. So check out my full video breaking down the best split setup to help you through this. In short, 3-day full body, 4-day upper lower, 5-day hybrid, 6-day push-pull legs. They're all viable to be able to help you progress as quickly as possible, depending on several other factors. Now, a huge thing to keep in mind is that when you're in a caloric deficit, progressive overload can become more challenging to achieve, especially during long and aggressive cuts. This is mainly because of reduced glycogen stores, less energy availability, and the body's overall focus on preserving energy. During a cut, pushing for more reps or more weight can still be beneficial, but it's essential to set 2 key expectations. Number 1, understand the impact of a caloric deficit. When you're cutting, your body isn't as primed to hit PRs or make big strength jumps because it's getting fewer calories than it needs to maintain its weight. As a result, pushing for overload might feel harder and might actually be harder, and you may even experience fluctuations in strength levels, especially as glycogen stores deplete and recovery is impaired. Next is focus on relative strength. So here's a key point to keep in mind that a lot of people don't realize. Relative strength matters just as much, if not more, during a cut. Relative strength refers to the amount of weight you're lifting compared to your body weight. So if you've lost, say, 15 pounds, but you're lifting the same weight for the same reps than you were 15 pounds prior, you've technically increased your relative strength. And this shows that you're retaining or maybe even building muscle and strength, which is a huge win in a calorie deficit. So don't get discouraged if the numbers on the bar don't increase significantly or even steadily while cutting. Keep in mind, on a cut, the goal is still, of course, pushing for progressive overload, but it's likely going to come slower and in some cases not at all. Focus on relative strength gains, keep the form clean, and remember that holding onto your lifts as you get leaner is a huge success on its own. Just get the cut over with so we can focus on more gains. Progressive overload doesn't happen in isolation. It's actually the feedback that your training, programming, and recovery are actually working to build muscle and strength. For overload to happen consistently, it's essential to focus on training fundamentals and supporting your body's ability to adapt. Keep these fundamentals in mind. Number 1, training intensity. High training intensity is critical for progressive overload. Each set should reach a very low RIR, meaning you're pushing close to failure on most sets, especially for major lifts. If you're constantly leaving several reps in the tank, you're missing out on growth signals your muscles need. By training with higher intensity, you're giving your body a reason to adapt, grow, and get stronger, which then translates, of course, to that feedback mechanism known as progressive overload. Adjusting volume for recovery. So as you progress, it's common for your body to need adjustments in training volume to keep up with recovery demands. Like I said before, that could mean increasing volumes for some muscle groups. It could mean decreasing it in some other cases. If you notice recovery is starting to suffer, signs like lingering soreness, a dip in performance, or mental burnout, it may be time to dial back the volume. Remember, more isn't always better. Adjusting volume to match your current recovery capacity allows you to sustain intensity and continue progressing rather than just hitting a plateau or risking injury. Next is the role of nutrition and sleep. So your performance in the gym, and hence your ability to progressive overload, is heavily influenced by your nutrition and your sleep. Proper nutrition fuels your workouts, of course, aids in muscle repair, and helps your energy levels keep stable. Sleep, on the other hand, is where tons of your muscle recovery and growth happen. Together, they form a big piece of the foundation of growth. If either one of these are lacking, especially after consecutive days, it will be harder to reach new levels of strength and size, as your muscles won't quite have the resources they need to fully adapt to the training stimulus. And the bigger picture of recovery, so beyond just training hard, factors like hydration, stress management, and consistent daily habits all play into how well you're able to recover and build muscle. Progressive overload is a response to all of these factors working together well. So as long as you're training with intensity, recovering well, and taking care of the fundamentals outside of the gym like nutrition, sleep, stress management, then you're setting up the conditions for growth. If you don't see overload today, that's okay. Sometimes it takes a few weeks to see an extra rep or an extra 5 pounds here or there. Just keep pushing hard and staying consistent. It's only a matter of time before it shows up. And if you want to take the guesswork out of all of this and you want to get your training dialed in so you can take your physique to the next level as soon as possible, make sure to join the Modern Physique Hub. Link is in the description below. So there you have it, the complete picture of progressive overload and everything you need to make it happen. Remember, progressive overload is not just a training strategy, it's the feedback that shows that your programming, intensity, recovery, and discipline in other areas are paying off. Don't forget to track your sessions to maximize progress in the gym. Trust in the process and know that as long as you're committed to improving in all these areas, growth will happen. For those of you who take these principles and apply them consistently, you're on the path to real gains for years to come. So keep showing up, bring the intensity every time you step into the gym, and I'll be seeing you at the top.